1988. Our story starts in a small town in South Jersey. 12-year-old me lives with his parents and brother in a house. This house in the Ocean City suburbs. Ocean City, New Jersey is a tourist attraction that people come to visit from miles around to enjoy the boardwalk, the smell of the ocean, the rides, the Macamanco's pizza, the Core Brothers custard, the cotton candy. Loved ones from Pennsylvania, friends and family come to visit the Jersey Shore. Also happening in 1988, and since the dawn of time, pop culture, pop music, hits on the radio. You can see here the Billboard Hot 100 for the week of October 8th, and at number 1 you have Love Bites by Def Leppard, and who didn't love UB40's Red Red Wine? And of course, Don't Worry Be Happy by Bobby McFerrin from the movie Cocktail was a bubbly, infectious little hit. But for people who wanted a little break from the radio, for kids who maybe didn't fit in high school, for somebody who just had a bad day, if you wanted something else, there was a whole underground movement bubbling up from the surface, being spearheaded by a band called Metallica. Legions of bands, good bands, bands radio wasn't playing, like Cro-Mags or Soundgarden, if you can believe that. Metal bands like Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, their music being traded on cassettes. If you had an album I didn't have, I gave you a blank cassette and you recorded it for me. If I had an album you didn't have, you gave me a blank cassette and I did the same for you. And if you liked the album, you went out and bought it so you could read the lyrics. Just because the music was being traded does not mean it wasn't being purchased. And that was the beauty of the way things were back then for countless music fans in every small town or city, in every county, state, country, and continent on this earth. So back in small town South Jersey, my friend Paul down the street has the 5 Metallica cassettes, and his older brother Pete has a dual cassette deck, so I give them a 5-pack of blank tapes, and Paul brings me back all of it. The first album, Kill 'Em All, the second album, Ride the Lightning, the third album, Master of Puppets, their EP, Garage Days Revisited, which introduced their new bass player Jason, and their fourth album, And Justice for All. I remember I made it a point to first listen to the albums in order, and I loved every second of what I was hearing. And upon listening more, I realized that I had discovered something special, something big, something that was still very much underground. And with them being an underground band, and with there being no internet, let alone YouTube, and with MTV, the great savior to all rock bands cool, not covering these guys, they couldn't have been more underground. Compounding their legendary underground status was the fact that there was almost no footage of these guys, save for their home video release on VHS of Cliff 'Em All, which was a tribute to their late bass player Cliff Burton, who died in a tragic bus accident in Sweden. Other than that, you got the back album covers and maybe some photos inside the album sleeves, and that was it. So when it came time for them to release a music video for their song One on MTV, the music channel that never covered them, it was met by some serious backlash from their most hardcore fans saying they were selling out, while newer, younger fans like myself, who were dying to see footage of these guys, knew that a music video would mean more footage. So somewhere in between, there was this back and forth that resolved with, they're going to get bigger, we can't stop it, let's just go with it. And the video did pretty well. It was kind of disturbing for some people, but it was a good video. And the album itself, And Justice for All, went on to be nominated for a Grammy that year. In fact, 1988 was the first year the Grammys had the metal category. It was created that year, and many thought Metallica was going to win. And notoriously, the big surprise upset, the Grammy goes to Jethro Tull for Crest of a Knave, so the metal Grammy goes to the flute band. It's one of those funny things that everybody laughs about now, but I have actually a cassette bootleg, a live show from somewhere on the East Coast from when I was a kid, and at the end of one, James says to the crowd, "Thank you, that's my very favorite Jethro Tull song," and the audience laughed because it's just one of those funny things that you can laugh about. But now we're going to get down to business. And Justice for All has no bass, or I should say almost no bass. It's turned down to the point where it is almost inaudible in the mix. In some songs it actually is inaudible. Don't get me wrong, the album is their most progressive, most complex, most math rock, monolithic effort to date. Nothing is more ambitious or intricate than what they recorded on A Justice for All. In fact, the next album, they simplified things. Speaking of, a few years later, in 1991, their new producer, Bob Rock, riding high on the success of his Dr. Feelgood album for Motley Crue, told them, you guys need to turn the bass up and you need to beef up the rhythm guitars. And they did just that, and the album that they recorded, the Black Album, went on to be the #1 selling metal album of all time. But that's a different story for a different channel. We're going to fast forward in time to the year 2009, when Guitar Hero Metallica is released on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. The game is pretty well received. It follows in the tradition of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, where you play on an Xbox controller that's shaped like a guitar. I never got it because I can actually play guitar and bass, and I didn't see the buttons and the pick gimmick thing when I can actually use strings and a real pick to actually play. So I passed. But something amazing happened. Isolated tracks were leaked. Guitar, bass, drums, bass, vocals, bass. You see what I'm getting at? The bass tracks. You could, for some songs from Justice for All, some songs from the first 3 albums, but bass isolated tracks. If you're a bass player or somebody who just likes hearing bass, like a normal human being in a song, this is great news. Sadly though, not all the master tracks were leaked. So on Kill 'Em All, of the 10 songs, only 3 have isolated tracks. On Ride the Lightning, of the 8 songs, 6 have isolated tracks. On Master of Puppets, of the 8 songs, 6 have isolated tracks. And on Injustice for All, of the 9 songs, 5 have isolated tracks. But for fans who wanted to know what the bass sounded like on some of the albums where the bass wasn't as loud as it could have been, it was nice. It was cool. It actually inspired a lot of remixes on YouTube. Most notably, Frost Media Productions' Justice for Jason, which was awesome to hear because he actually put all the Jason tracks with bass lines and did bass covers for the 4 songs that didn't have isolated bass tracks. And it was pretty cool. And he has 4 or 5 versions of it. In the first version, the bass was loud, and then the second version, it was just quieter. The third version, he cleaned it up. The 4th version, I think he did to the 30th anniversary remaster, and then the 5th version is the best version, I think, but definitely check him out, because that's some great stuff. So knowing that we had the bulk of the first 4 albums isolated bass tracks, but not all, was bittersweet. It was kind of awesome. And then you had Justice for Jason by Frost Media Productions as the bass solution for Justice for All. I'd moved on. Fast forward to the year 2016. Metallica releases its first 2 albums, Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, as reissued remasters available on CD, vinyl, and deluxe boxed sets. The boxed sets came with all kinds of goodies, including extra audio discs of concerts, of outtakes, of alternate versions, and the remasters themselves, they were remasters of source audio and not remasters from the actual masters. There's a difference. When you do it from the actual masters, it takes a lot more time, and there's the temptation to remix. When you do it from source audio, it could be a CD, it could be whatever digital format they have it saved in, but they clean up the audio there. And they were okay audio-wise. I was hoping for more bass, but again, they were remastered from source audio, so it didn't happen. It's worth noting that also around this time, Jason went on Eddie Trunk, and Eddie asked him this.
As you know, the Metallica are starting to reissue and remaster their catalog. They did the first 2 records, and eventually they're going to get to Injustice. And I'm curious when they get to Injustice and get into the remastering, if they may go a little step further and find a way to bring you out a little bit more on that record.
Let's get Fleming in there. He'll take care of it.
I mean, how much can be done from a technical standpoint, remastering a record to put more bass in it, Jason?
Wrong guy to ask. I think that, as far as understanding, with them mastering and all this kind of new technology and crap they can come up with now, they got to be able to put everything in. The tracks exist. And I think that if you get Fleming in there, with the way he does things now, and give him a second with it, he can bring it back, and it'll be a new kind of beast or whatever. Maybe if they want to try to make it different for a re-release or whatever.
Jason sounded optimistic about there being a remix of Injustice for All at this point, and if you watch the rest of the video, he goes on to say that he's working with them at the time in some capacity, and he wouldn't say what. I think it was regarding the legalities of releasing the reissued remaster of Injustice for All. And fast forward now to 2017, Master of Puppets is released as a reissued remaster as well, also available on CD, vinyl, and deluxe boxed set. The boxed set also includes a book, audio discs of concerts, and outtakes, and same treatment for the audio, also remastered from source audio and not the original masters. Also around this time, the now infamous video appears on YouTube of Steve Thompson explaining that it was Lars who instructed him to turn the bass down, and James who went along with it. Despite saying how great the bass part was, it was still turned down. And fast forward to 2018, when Metallica released its reissued remaster of the 598 EP Garage Days Re-Revisited. It was available on CD, black and orange vinyl LP, as well as a picture disc. And with the Garage Days EP being deleted years back and unavailable to buy in stores, and having spent $50 on a CD version of this in the late 90s in Berkeley, California, it was really cool to have this piece in hand. And it didn't come with a box set, but it didn't have to. It wasn't a major album. It was just an EP, but cool to have a remastered version, even if it was only from Source Audio. And now, ladies and gents, I wish to suspend all time travel, as this is the period in time that I wish to focus on. But first, a small backstory. For those of you who don't know, and there's probably very few of you, Cliff Burton was killed in a bus accident in Sweden. Jason Newsted was hired to replace him. Cliff's parents gave Jason the blessing. Garage Days is released, the bass is nice and loud, and then reality sets in and the band begins to grieve Cliff's loss. And they do it through Jason. And there's lots of stories about this on the internet, about how the band wasn't prepared to deal with the loss of Cliff, about how they didn't know how to grieve at 22 years old, how they took it out on Jason, how Jason was an innocent target. Regardless, when they went into the studio to record Injustice for All, and they finished recording and it came time to mix the album down, the decision was made to turn the bass down. And it was a call made by Lars, backed by James, against the very vocal protests of the two guys who mixed the album, Steve Thompson and Michael Barbiero, who thought the bass part was great. And later also to the surprise of Fleming Rasmussen, who engineered Ride the Lightning and Master Puppets as well as Injustice for All, and who also thought the bass parts were killer. Turning down Jason's bass parts on this album is viewed by many as the most malicious musical slight in the history of recording. Jason himself has said that upon hearing the final mix of the album, it left him in the dirt. He also said that he's dealt with grief over the album for many years, but he's happy that on the other albums going forward, he was heard. And short backstory over, we're still in 2018 now, with the great question being, will Metallica do the right thing? Will James and Lars do right by Jason and release a mix of Injustice for All where Jason's parts can be heard? And having almost 10 years to listen to the isolated tracks, especially the bass tracks, you realize there's a lot that was on the albums that also Cliff contributed to that you couldn't hear on the final mixes of the album, as if Lars and James had an aversion to bass to begin with. On Kill 'Em All, the bass is decent enough, and on Garage Days, it's plenty loud. But if you listen to Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, there's a lot of parts that you can hear in the Cliff-only bass stems on YouTube that are not on the album or are not as loud or barely audible. And so you think, maybe it wasn't just Jason. Maybe it was James and Lars. Maybe they just don't like bass. And with the reissued remaster of Injustice for All in the inevitable future, speculation began as to whether or not there would be a remix that included the bass, a repaired mix to go along with the box set. Toby Rage Wright, who recorded the bass parts for the album, offered to remix it. And Fleming Rasmussen also offered to remix the album, citing Jason was a better player technically and the bass parts should be heard. So eventually Fleming says Metallica is never going to remix the album. He says it so they don't have to, I'm pretty sure. But he does go on to say that in another interview. He says they'll remaster it, but they have no plans to remix. And now fast forward to 2019, the reissued remaster of Injustice for All is released on CD, vinyl, and deluxe boxed set. And the boxed set again comes with everything you'd expect. Live audio discs, vinyl stuff, a book, lots of pictures, but no remix with Jason's bass parts. And as you can see here, based on these Amazon reviews, I was not the only person disappointed by the fact that the reissued remaster did not contain a remix with more bass. And after the fact, later on that year, James has an interview defending why there's no bass remix with the Injustice for All reissue. He probably heard some of the fallout. And had to say this, they were freaking fried and burnt from lack of sleep and traveling place to place and playing shows with earplugs, and that's probably why there wasn't so much bass. And then he goes on to say something about the Mona Lisa, not that I'm comparing it to the Mona Lisa, but he does. And then he says, who gives a And then he says Steve Thompson shouldn't be so hard on himself. When Steve Thompson was never hard on himself, he was hard on Lars, and James wanted to deliberately keep Jason's bass off the album. And then this rare gem from an audio interview with Kirk Hammett, where he says he was also pushing for there to be a remix of Injustice for All. So, if Steve Thompson and Toby Rage Wright and Fleming Rasmussen and Kirk Hammett were all pushing for there to be a remix of Injustice for All that included Jason's bass parts, that means only two people stopped it. James and Lars. So this was something of a catalyst for me, because I have all the remastered CDs, I have all the isolated bass tracks, I have a decent home recording studio, and I know how to use it. So my mission statement to you is this. I'm going to be releasing a bass solution for every Metallica song on the first 4 studio albums. They will be released in order, starting with Hit the Lights and ending with Dyer's Eve. The problem with the Metallica library and the isolated bass tracks is that it's all very scattered. The goal is a complete collection where the bass is cohesive and consistent from song to song. This will not be bass in your face, where the bass is overly loud, but these songs will have Cliff's and Jason's contributions audible in the mix. Alright, Hit the Lights is first, and therefore next. This is the Metallica Re-Remastered series. Stay tuned for more. If you wish to support the series, please check out the link in the description down below. Thank you.